So this is really something I arrived on because from dealing with physios, I found that a lot of strength and conditioning or fitness people didn't really understand how they could use physios, and some physios, they would do things that were quite incredible. They'd take you to, or they'd take an athlete to a more robust level than an S&C might, and then other physios would get you to like squeeze a towel with your toes and then send you away. And I found that if you actually understand what a physio can do as an S&C, you can get a hell of a lot out of them. And then, but sometimes there's this competition, and the same competition will sometimes happen with coaches and S&Cs, where the S&Cs maybe think they can do more than they can, or the coaches expect things of them they can't really do. So I'm just going to talk about some key areas of the session or different components of training and things that coaches might not have thought of, or coaches might have, but ways you might want to think about rejigging them. So it's really just about how to get the best from an S&C if you're working with one. So warm up. So this is a big one for me. At the moment, there's a lot of warm-ups that promise all sorts of things from an activation proprioception point of view, and that you can do these like special activation exercises, and that's going to go away, and it's going to optimize what that player can do, and it's going to fix what that player can do. There's a limitation with this. I want you to think about, say you've got some typical glute med adductor or something like that. So you've got someone who their glute med is for want of a better word, dysfunctional, and they've got hip extensions occurring more with the adductor magnus or whatever it is. That's the way that person's set up, and that might be the way that person's set up because of their environment and their training, their sport, or it might actually be their anthropometry. So it might be their build, like that might have a lot to do with their parents. And you can't really get fully around that with some activation exercises, because the nervous system has decided that is the way that this person is going to deal with forces. That's the way they're going to redistribute loads. And if you're just going to do 5 minutes of a special activation exercise, you might get some sort of initial result and some sort of change, but it's not going to last for 80 minutes of rugby, and it's not going to last for like a sevens tournament. Some S&C coaches, they'll do these courses, and they've paid $1,200 US, and the presentation values are really good, and they think that these magic warm-ups are going to fix all the athletes. The only way you actually get around these things is in the gym. So you have to actually go and address these things, work hard at them 3 times a week minimum, pretty much, before you're really going to see changes. So this is where the coach and the S&C, I think, can come together really nicely, because to me, the coach is more worried about availability than they are about shaving 0.2 of a second off a 40 meter. So you can still use these warm-ups and you can still incorporate them to your toolbox, but get your S&C to use them as a diagnostic tool. So if you've got guys who are uncomfortable when they're trying to do the activation exercise, or they're reporting certain symptoms, or they don't seem to be able to do very simple tasks, or they don't seem to be getting the right things to fire, this is where the coach and the S&C can put their heads together, and the coach can say, well, can you, in your gym sessions, secondary exercises where this guy's working on this 3 times a week for a month, and then we'll review at the end of the month. You can actually pick that up in your warm-up. You can actually pick that up in your 5 to 15 minutes before they're actually getting on the pitch. You use these sorts of warm-ups as diagnostic tools, and it's telling the coach who's going to have problems, and it's giving the S&C feedback about how to go away and fix those things. So what those warm-up programs promise, it's probably no more than damage limitation, but you can actually get something really, really useful out of it if you use it as that diagnostic tool to go and get the players to go where work is. So the other type of warm-up, contextual movement. So if you think of runners, jumpers, and throwers, these people, they will run, jump, and throw better than anyone in the world. But what they'll do is they'll often use elements of runs, jumps, and throws in their warm-up, because you can think of it as like a file where it's somewhere on the hard drive. And, you know, when you turn your computer on, you have to wait a bit before things actually can be clicked on. It's the same with this. So even the people who are the best in the world at runs, jumps, and throws, they will often have to just do variants of those moves before they go and do their event, to just sort of tell the nervous system, this is the movement pattern I want to access. Now, if you think about this in terms of your players who might not be able to do basic skills as you like them, or they can do the basic skills, but you want them to be able to do basic skills at speed or without thinking or under fatigue, you can actually get in extra practice every single time by incorporating these things into your warm-ups. What a lot of strength and conditioning coaches will do is they'll think of movement from a certain school of thought. So some will think in cardinal planes, they'll think sagittal, frontal, transverse. Some will think about slings. Some might think more about muscle groups. I personally like to think about joints, because you take care of the joints, the muscles will pretty much take care of themselves. But you can talk to your S&C and say, look, these are some of the movements that I want my guys to get extra exposure to. These are some of the things that I want them to be able to do excellently without thinking. Is there a way that you can incorporate some of your movement patterns, your movement qualities into these things? And what that does over time is it gives them this exposure to those primary skills that, you know, you don't actually have to compete with. You don't have to say, like, well, I need this amount of time for my warm-up, and then we only get this amount of time for skills, and then we get this amount of time for conditioning. And as an example, there's something that I've done in the past. So I might do wrestling work with forwards within a warm-up, and more speed-related stuff with backs. And so it's exposing them to the movements that I want them to get you know, extra exposure to. But then I might fit in things like whether it's like a back pedal, or whether it's you know, a certain side-to-side movement. So you're ticking off all the sort of fundamental things that you'd warm up, but you're incorporating it into extra skill work. 2-on-1s is something that, you know, 2-on-1's a pretty good warm-up. Put in some sort of basic pod type structure when they play their warm-up game of touch. You know, you can just find ways of squeezing in the movements, and it's about specificity as well. So the best warm-ups are preparing them for the tasks that they actually need to do. This is something where the coach and the S&C can work really well together. And one that gets neglected is jumping. If you think about the importance of jumping in, like, you know, trying to compete for the ball, lineouts and restarts, if you have an S&C that actually understands jumping really well, that's something that can be incorporated quite easily into a warm-up. You can do both. So you could do the diagnostic activation type warm-up for a month, and then next month you could do the contextual movement type warm-up. And you could flip between the two. So you're getting the feedback into anatomically where they have issues, but at the same time, you're getting in extra movement for the things that you really want them to improve in. Right, skill development. Any type of skill, you can actually progress it to a conditioning game. I found that what you need to do is if the level of skill mastery is low, it might need to be introduced into a warm-up or a drill. Over time, once that sort of significant mastery in the skill where there's an acceptable success rate, you might then do it in conditioning drills, so that they're doing the skill under fatigue. And then when they've developed a level of mastery of that skill, and they can even do it under fatigue, then you want to maybe incorporate it into a game. And then in the game, what will happen is they have to do that reacting to a visual stimuli, which is relevant to the sport. And of course, fatigue gets involved as well. If you've got someone who, after 4 weeks, is having trouble sidestepping cones, they're not going to be able to be much of a sidestepper in a match. So when you're trying to select things that you want to maybe start off as warm-up, then become conditioning, and then become a game, you want to start seeing, like, what players can do them and what players can't. If you can't do a footwork drill with no pressure, you're not going to select the right movement in the right situation under pressure. This is where S&Cs and coaches often clash, because coaches will often think every player has to be able to do every skill. And if I can't get everyone doing it, I don't have the luxury of dividing my time where this guy gets to do that and that guy gets to do that. This is the beauty of games, because what you can actually do in your games is you can actually set secret missions up for the guys that get it and the guys that can do it. So you might have two players, and over a course of 3 weeks, you've tried to teach them how to goose step, and one of them, he gets it, and the other player, he will try and goose step into a brick wall, and the movement looks good, but he just has no understanding of how to use it in space. And you might get a guy who can't even do the movement. So there's no reason why you can't get that guy who does get it and set him a secret mission and get him to incorporate it into a game. So you've got a ruck touch game. You have a focus on building a pod. You have a focus on looking for space. But you tell that one guy, look, you're behind enemy lines. You're just off on your secret mission. I want you to try and goose step someone. So you don't have to have this sort of battle that everyone has to be able to do the same skills. And it's a way of exposing people to movement in a warm-up. After 3 weeks, you go, this guy's not going to be able to do this. This guy's not going to be able to do that. This guy's getting it. We're going to condition that with them, and then we're going to get them to do it in games, while everyone else is focusing on something else. So it's just a nice way to kind of have your cake and eat it with skill development. So conditioning. So this is something where you can probably get a lot from your S&C. And this is something where, especially this younger generation of S&Cs, they're actually quite good at this. So with small-sided games, you can get the energy system development that you need, because most S&Cs are going to have an understanding of energy requirements, recovery requirements, and then how that needs to be tailored to the game. So if you've got something that's a goal for you as a coach that you want players to be able to do, you can then throw that back on the S&C and say, how long do they need to be able to do this for? How much rest do you need to have? Can you design a game time-wise that has these qualities? And however they'll do it, they might look at it from glycolytic, lactate. They might be looking at it from aerobic, anaerobic ATP. They will have some sort of training in what they've been taught, where they'll understand how long it needs to be done for and how long they need to rest or not rest. And so you can really prepare very specifically, you can prepare players for the demands of the game by doing this. One that I like to do is just a very simple way of subdividing it is I think of speed, ball and play, and worst case scenario. So speed, people really need recovery, otherwise it's not speed. But ball in play, you just think about how long will this skill really need to be used for. So for instance, if you take something from wrestling and it actually comes from a real wrestling sport where you might have to wrestle someone for 3 to 5 minutes, don't apply that to a sport where after 10 seconds someone's going to come in and help you. And the referee's definitely going to blow his whistle before a minute's up. So think about what is the ball in play time that we really need this skill to be able to function at, and that's how you design these things. And a worst case scenario will be what's the most unrealistic but can still happen ball in play time, and you have at least some sort of game or some sort of conditioning for that, because that's something where if you don't prepare for it, you might get injured. If you do prepare for it, your players are more likely to be able to just continually react, support, and they'll probably score. So you'll find that it's going to be probably something under 3 minutes, because that's that's the longest at the highest level. But that's something, again, where you put your head together with your S&C and you say, like, what to you, what is looking like a typical ball in play time? What is looking like a typical worst case scenario? And you ask the S&C, how hard are they actually working? Some of you might have seen that really famous bit of footage with the Chiefs and the Highlanders where it went for 33 minutes. And if you have seen that, watch it again, because you'll see that it's not a flogging. It's not a 3-minute flogging. It's 3 minutes of constant play, but it's not 3 minutes of constant running. Every time there's a tackle, every time there's a ruck, the guys who aren't involved are standing off the ball. They're waiting. But it's the sort of thing that will come naturally to an S&C. So if you think of the skill components that you want in a game, and then you put your head together and say, from an energy system development, what do you need? How much time do you need? How much rest do you need? and how often do they need to do it. Square pegs and round holes. So there's a classic story about Charlie Francis talking about linemen being trained in the NFL, where coaches would try and give them a flogging because they said they're lazy and they're unfit and all the rest of it. They weren't that type of athlete. They were power athletes, and it was a kind of misconception coaches had that, you know, these guys, they weren't really lazy. They just needed to conserve their energy for massive efforts. So you've got to think, if you've got guys in your squad, like, could this guy be more of like a Billy Vunipola than Michael Hooper? And do you want to turn the Hoopers into the Vunipolas? Or do you want to actually just see what they actually are good at and develop that? And then the thing that they're maybe not so gifted, you kind of just try and raise that to a level where it's acceptable without subtracting from their gifts. And this is something where you can put your head together with an S&C, because they're often trained now in things like, they'll do things like neurotyping, where I'm not, the jury's out on this, I think, but they'll be thinking about, like, you know, the brain chemistry of this athlete, like how are they motivated, how are they driven, and tissue classifications, like, you know, is this someone who relies on producing concentric force muscle? Is this someone who relies on, you know, their natural elasticity? Are they more, they'll call it fascial? But whatever classification that the S&C has, they'll be looking at these things in their own way, maybe in the gym, maybe in the warm-up. So you might be able to put your head together and come up with a really good profile of actually what your athletes are, and rather than change them into something that they're not going to be very good at, you might be able to optimize the values that they already have, and then but still kind of keep them up to speed with the requirements of the team. Yeah, you can see that. So this is just something that comes naturally to S&Cs, and it doesn't really come naturally to rugby coaches. Intuitively, they often go the other way with this. So just typically, if your team plays a game and there's a disproportionately high number of tackles because you just don't get the ball, but at the same time that day your tackling is really bad, most coaches when that happens is to have more tackles when they come to training. Same if there's a disproportionately high amount of scrums, but you lose in the scrum, their response on Monday is, we're going to have a heavy scrum session. And instinctively that will make sense, but it's not the best thing for the body often when you've had an unusually high amount of something, whether it's rucks or tackles, whatever it is, to then expose the body to a higher amount of tackles or training, both from a physical point of view, but from a motor learning point of view. Like, the system's probably been a bit fried at that point. So although obviously you've got to take those things seriously, you've got to address them, this is where an S&C can actually probably give you quite good tools on how you're doing, how are you exposing your athletes to things. Even though it seems very important, sometimes you might want to back off based on what happened on Saturday or what happened on Sunday. So you can see the example I've given on the right, where you've got a rucking set piece, tackling, and space. Yeah, so this is a kind of common one that you'll get in sort of 1960s periodization type things. The problem that's been highlighted with stuff like this is, by the time you get to October, you haven't done any like focused rucking work since July. So, but a lot of people will actually coach like this because they won't record what they're doing, and they won't have a simple tool for retaining what they're doing and measuring what they're doing. That it just very easily sort of escapes their mind. This is something where you can actually work with an S&C to just with like simple little tool, simple little graphic to remind yourself to focus on the important things, but focus on the way that doesn't overstress and just completely bore your athletes. So the thing on the left, that's from Charlie Francis speed program, and the blue and the red, they'll represent different qualities. So the blue might be weights, the red might be bounding plyometric type activities. But what you can see is he's never neglecting either of them. So this is called vertical integration. The idea is that if something's important, it gets some focus all of the time, but you vary it. You share the load, you share the wealth between other qualities, but there's always some sort of exposure to it. If you see the one on the right, this is one that I did for a coach, and I'll just actually throw out a question there. So you can see that I've put tackling and breakdown always get focus. because I've considered them to be like so important that they always have to be used. What would you think are like two problems with this model on the right comparing to the one on the left? Little minor adjustment I could make to that to make it better. What I'm thinking is if you just actually flipped October and November, so you're still not really changing anything other than the order, it means you're never more than a month away from set piece focus. Whereas the way that is at the moment, by the time we get to the end of October, it's been 2 months since we've had that focus on set piece. So it's just little things like that, but having graphics like that put together, and this young generation of SNCs, they're really good with spreadsheets. So they can do something like this for you in 5 minutes and go, well, this is your plan, and this is where we're not gonna have the focus, or this is where you're gonna be overloaded. Just another thing, if you compare my one on the right to the one on the left, if you compare the blue and the red and my green and my blue, what's another difference there?
Thomas, is because as your season goes on, you taper?
Exactly. So there's no tapering there. It's just a block.
Yeah.
It's just a constant, consistent load. Whereas the model on the left, it's just got this natural undulation going in. So you just, and look, that could be how many minutes your small-sided game is. It could be how many days of the week we do that game. It could be how many sets. But it's just a way that we're naturally giving those athletes time so they can be trained at like a high chronic load, but we can still back them off, push them forward, back them off, push them forward as we need, maybe going up into big games, maybe coming off the back of a hard game. And it's really hard to do in your head if you're a coach and you've got 35 people who you're trying to manage. But if you've got some little graphic like that, your S&C who does this sort of stuff all the time, but with weight stream type stuff, can just put there for you and say, well, you can apply this to your scrums, you can apply this to your rucks. I mean, like this is where I'll probably say something controversial, because like my feeling about GPS is you can't measure quality with it. And I'll talk a lot to people who use it, and I'll ask them about like, well, so how do you measure quality of work? And they're like, oh, well, we don't really have a measurement for that. And I've spoken to coaches who, we know, S&C coaches who were around before it was used. And that they'll talk about stories where, like, you know, the sports scientists will be saying, you know, take this guy off. He's only touched the ball 5 times in the last half hour, but 3 of those times he scored a goal. I work with so many S&Cs who take tons and tons and tons of data and don't do anything with it. Coaches are often intimidated by the data and say, well, that sounds really impressive. In other words, you're measuring this, you're measuring that, you're measuring that. But often it's just not actually telling you something. A lot of the data, it's describing things, it's not explaining it. I think coaches often instinctively understand the simplest things that they can fix with those players. And then you work around with the S&Cs and say, like, how can I make these guys a bit stronger? How can I make them a bit faster? How can I make them more robust so they're less likely to get injured, so that more of them are available? And I think the real data that the S&Cs can, like, you know, really use is in the weights room. It's like, how is this guy trying to move? And you can find those things out in the warm up and cool down as well. It's guys are measuring too much data and they're not training their eyes. Your metric will be people turning up to win rucks. Are people getting up off the ground to provide an option at first receiver? Is that person, like, you know, running off the ball, providing support when someone makes a break? Those are probably more valuable metrics. And I've seen guys kind of abuse GPS and do things like they'll try and run off the line as fast as they can to get their numbers up while the guy's taking the conversion. And they're not even running at the kicker. You know, if they were running at the kicker to put it under pressure, that would be one thing. But they're just running to get their numbers up. You know, they'll do a course. The course costs them $1,200 US. They've been promised the world, and they've been told this fixes everything. And because they've spent so much money on it, they have an investment in believing that it's really going to work. And I think this is one thing where you can get together in S&C and you can say, look, what do you think you can improve? What are you good at? And how long are we going to give it to see if it's actually making a difference? You can meet them halfway and they might surprise you. They might be able to get guys like doing some stuff within 2 weeks, or you might find that you spend a month on something and you have no discernible improvement whatsoever. That can be like, a learning curve for both of you, but it's just, I think those sorts of conversations are where you really get the best value for your players.